Again, once again, welcome to this talk about feature runners. I'm Sandeep Nair. I'm an Android developer based in London. I've been building mobile applications since 2007, and I'm going to talk about a problem you all could have faced at some point of time. And the problem is that the app you're working on takes too long to build. And every time I make a small change, it takes quite a long time to build and run. Most of my day is spent just looking at the build logs and the slow builds. And even after all of that, when I start the app, I need to go through maybe a login screen, click through so many screens like your splash, your home screen, and then finally come to the feature. And then you realize there's a mistake. You make some code change, build again, takes the same amount of time again. It's quite frustrating. Can I see a quick show of hands if you have faced the problem? Yeah, right. So, what can be done? Well, there are many things. Obvious thing will be to improve the build speed and the build process, and obviously you should do that. But at some point you get stuck, right? There's a saturation point, keep improving the build, but at some point you're putting so much effort, but it's not going that fast. So the return of investment is not so good. So can we think out of the box a little bit? That's where feature runner comes in. And so the principle here is that my module is my world. It's a focused approach, a mini app with just what matters for you. So you don't, so look at this picture. So your typical app has your app module, your feature modules, and a bunch of different things. And it takes time, right? So that's where feature runner comes in. And it's like I said, it's a mini app. It builds and launches quickly. It doesn't include anything which you are not interested in, which means the other feature modules. And it launches your feature with the first screen directly, the first screen of your feature directly. So how do we get there? The good news is that there's no magic, there's no special library you have to integrate to. It's just a few steps anyone can do in their apps. And the first step would be to modularize. And the previous talk also touched a little bit on modularization. It's probably you have already done this. This is kind of the first thing for a big app that you should have, Gradle modules and split it into different manageable modules. If you haven't done it already, Android documentation has some great tips. That link points to that. Now, if the dependency between your modules looks something like this, then there's a problem. We have to simplify the dependencies. So in this one, the app depends on features. Features depend on each other, and they depend on the common modules, and sometimes there's upward dependency also. That's not good. So we should get rid of that. This looks better. So you have your app depending on the features, and the features depending on the common components or the shared components, but the features don't depend on each other. All right? So you have a workable code base now to start working on your feature runner. Now let's add a feature runner. So feature runner is its own Gradle module. So we're working on feature A, so we're only interested in that, and our feature runner depends only on feature A and indirectly on the common components, but not on the other features. Also, note that app doesn't depend on the feature runner. So when you are actually doing an app build, your feature runner doesn't get built into the APK or the bundle. The next step would be to create this mini app or the skeleton app. It's an Android application, so you need an Android application class. On the left side is a generic feature runner Android application class, which you can reuse across your feature runners. So you may be creating like 5 or 6 different feature runners based on how many features you work at any point. So this can be reused. And on the right-hand side is the implementation for your feature. Notice that it's still an application. And we're doing some pre-initialization and also the dependency injection. I'll come to dependency injection in a second. The key thing to note is that it will have its own DI graph. Again, I'll touch upon that in a moment. Once you have your application class, you need a loading activity. Most of your apps will have a pre-initialization before you get into your feature. It may be an API call which get some data from the backend, could be a database initialization, could be, I don't know, shared preferences or anything which requires to be done before you get into the feature to take your app to a certain state before you enter the feature. So to cover that, we need a loading activity of some sorts. And like the picture shows, the feature runner main activity here is that loading activity. And feature main activity is the first activity in your feature. So everything which is usually done in your splash screen or home screen or the ones before that, you could probably mimic it or maybe even do the real implementation in the loading activity. And Android creates the application and then opens the loading activity, do everything there and get into your feature. You will probably need a login screen if your app has a login every time sort of setup. Some of the apps have that, but if you have a long living token or anything like that, you probably won't need it. But yeah, you may have to create like a dummy login. And the next step would be to create, configure the dependency injection. You will need a separate DI graph for the feature runner. It's not the same application which you are running. So some of them may be like common modules, but some of them may be very specific. Yeah, you have a different graph. So you may have to like duplicate some of the modules and modify it specifically for the feature runner. Let's take a look at an example. So in this one, on the left-hand side, you have the module which is required for the app. And on the right-hand side, you have the feature runner using the module of the same name, but the preference key is different. Can be anything, and just an example here. Yeah, so some of them may have to be duplicated and modified. How do you handle navigation when you are constrained to just one feature? Most of the time, we are only concerned about the module which you are working on, but sometimes we may have to handle navigation to other features. So there are multiple ways to do that. You could have one activity per feature sort of architecture. That's one navigation graph per feature. So inter-feature navigation, jumping into a different feature. You can use an interface of some sort and implement using intents if you want. Deep links is another option. But if you're using, let's say, the interface and intent sort of routing, you can inject a fake implementation in the feature runner, and you don't have to necessarily open the other activity, but you can do something different, maybe like showing a toast or snack bar or something like that. So you can still work with that. You know that the action has happened, but you're not depending on the other activity where the actual you're not depending on the other module where the actual activity resides in. So, all right, so we got the feature runner. So can we make it even faster? So there are some bonus points for making it faster. You could add a network interceptor and use a stub instead of making server calls each time. If you create a network interceptor and add it to the HTTP, you can use stubs or JSON stubs within the local repository. So that gives you not just speed, but also you can modify your local JSONs much faster than you can modify the API response. So if you're checking something like the text view wraps or the content scrolls nicely, you want to test with longer text or more text or whatever, you have more control over the response. So that makes, again, you get into the activity and there is no API call. It's all local. That makes it like super fast. Just a tip on like how you can do that quickly. If you have an API path that says like API offers, you could create a directory structure similar to that, and then you just have a very simple mapper which reads JSON files from that path when the interceptor encounters an API with the same path. Again, this is not the only way to do it, it's just a way to do it. And also, another bonus is you get faster UI tests. So if you have an Android test residing in the app module, typically a slow building test, but you could move that, if possible, to your feature runner, and that becomes much faster. Let's have a look at an example code. I need to switch that. And give me a second to do the mirroring. Right. So it's a simple, straightforward weather tracker application. Just run it, and I'll explain the code structure here. So we have an app module, we have some feature modules, and we have some shared modules. City search, warnings, and weather are the features here. And let's say I'm working on weather. Expand a bit. So just one activity and one composable for the explanation purposes. And I'll come to the code in a second. So you have your home screen, which shows the cities you have tracked. And you can add one. Search. It shows the weather. So this is the weather module and the weather activity. And if you click on the toolbar action here, it opens the weather warnings activity. Right. So, like I said, I'm working on weather feature, and I don't need to be bothered about the warnings and the city search at the moment. So I created this feature runner for weather as an application. You have the loader activity. So I don't have a pre-init here. It's a fairly straightforward one. So just starting the main screen activity from here. I'll come to the router module in a second. Let me run the feature runner. So it builds rather quickly. Again, this is not a big app, so even the app was building quite fast, but yeah, it builds quickly, and also you directly land on it. So it's sort of similar to the preview or the live preview, but it just more realistic and running on the emulator with other than just UI code, right? And so we had a button here, right? How do we handle that? So let's have a look at the activity. We have this router interface, and we are implementing that with an intent router. So let me show you the, sorry. In the app, we have an intent router, which uses like intents to start the feature activities, but we don't have the warnings activity or the search activity defined, right? So in the feature runner, we have a fake router injected, and it just shows a toast. If you click on that, it just shows a toast. So yeah, so that's one way of handling the inter-feature navigation or navigating out of your feature runner. And that's pretty much it. Right, I won't stand here anymore between you and your lunch. Thank you for coming. If you have any questions, I'll be around.